Aaron's footsteps echoed through the long corridor as guards pulled his chains forward. The metal shackles rubbed against his wrists, leaving red marks on his skin, but he did not cry out. Two alien guards walked on each side of him, their tall bodies covered in silver armor. Their glowing eyes never blinked, and their sharp claws rested close to their weapons. The hall ahead of him seemed endless. The walls were made of stone mixed with strange metal, shining in green light from torches that were not fire but something more advanced. Each step he took made the chains clatter louder, and the sound carried into the chamber ahead. Aaron lifted his head high even though he was bound, refusing to appear weak. When the heavy doors opened, a wave of sound washed over him. Hundreds of alien nobles filled the grand hall, standing in curved rows that rose higher with each step like an arena. Their skin was blue, silver, or pale gray. Some had horns, others had smooth heads, and all wore long robes that shimmered with symbols of their houses. Their voices filled the hall, muttering about the human in chains. "A fragile creature," one whispered. "Why bring such a thing here?" another said. "Better to end it now than waste the queen's time," a third muttered. But Aaron did not lower his head. His dark hair fell across his face, yet his eyes stayed fixed on the throne at the end of the hall. The throne was raised high above all others, made of black stone with bright silver veins running across it. On that throne sat Queen Zira, ruler of the empire. She was tall, her presence commanding. Her robe was deep crimson, flowing down the steps of her throne. A crown of crystal sat upon her head, glowing softly with inner light. Her skin was pale silver, her eyes sharp and bright like two burning stars. She leaned slightly forward, watching the human brought before her. The guards forced Aaron to stop in the center of the hall. They pushed his shoulders down, trying to make him kneel, but he locked his legs and stayed upright. The chains rattled, but he stood firm. A murmur spread through the court as nobles noticed his resistance. "Bow before the queen," one of the guards hissed. Aaron's voice was quiet yet steady. "I will stand," the guard snarled, but Queen Zira raised her hand, silencing them. The hall grew quiet as her voice filled the chamber. "This is the human captured on the border," she said. "He is the only one left alive after the skirmish. I want to know why he was spared." One of the generals stepped forward. His armor was black, and his horned head gave him a menacing look. He bowed before the queen. "My queen," he said. The human fought with strange determination. He refused to surrender even when surrounded. "My soldiers wished to finish him, but I thought you might want to see this creature yourself." The queen's eyes never left Aaron. "Strange determination," she repeated softly. "Is that so?" The general nodded. "Yes, my queen." He fought with no weapon in his hand, yet he bit, kicked, and threw stones like they were blades. He should have been afraid, but his eyes held no fear. "I thought perhaps you would find it curious." The queen rested her chin on her hand, studying Aaron. "Curious indeed." The court buzzed with whispers again. Some nobles laughed, shaking their heads. Others looked uneasy, as though the very sight of a human standing proud in chains unsettled them. One noble with long silver horns stepped forward. His voice was filled with contempt. "My queen, forgive me, but this is foolish. A human is a beast of flesh and bone, weak and unworthy of your gaze. Why do we waste time on this?" Another noble shouted in agreement. "End him and let the court return to matters of importance." But before Queen Zira could answer, Aaron lifted his head and spoke for the first time in the hall. His voice was calm, yet it carried through the chamber like a clear bell. "You call me weak because of chains. But chains do not decide strength. Chains only show who is afraid." The hall froze. For a moment, Silence fell heavy on every noble. No one expected the human to speak so boldly. The guards beside him tightened their grip, ready to strike him down, but Queen Zira raised her hand once more. "Let him speak," she ordered. The guards stopped. All eyes turned to Aaron. His heart pounded in his chest, but he did not let it show. He had not planned to speak, yet something inside him told him to hold his ground. He looked up at the queen, meeting her sharp gaze. For a moment, it seemed like the world around him disappeared, and only her eyes mattered. Her stare was unshaken, but there was a flicker of curiosity in them. The queen straightened on her throne. Her voice was low but filled with command. "Human, you stand in my hall in shackles. You are alive because I allow it? You dare to speak with such tone? Tell me why I should not order your end at this very moment." Aaron did not flinch. His chains clattered as he shifted his stance. He spoke slowly, each word clear. "Because ending me proves nothing. Letting me stand proves everything." The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted, some outraged, others stunned. The guards growled in disbelief. Yet Queen Zira remained still, her eyes locked on Aaron. She leaned forward on her throne, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "This human has courage," she said. "Perhaps more than some who claim greatness in this court." Her words silenced the hall. The nobles looked at her in shock. Aaron stood tall, breathing steadily, his chains heavy but his spirit unbroken. Queen Zira's posture changed. She sat straighter, taller, her interest in the human growing stronger. In that moment, the hall felt different. What began as a display of weakness was turning into something none of the aliens expected. The court remained in silence after Queen Zira's words. The nobles shifted uneasily, their pride hurt by the idea that a human prisoner could be praised in their presence. The guards still kept their hold on Aaron's chains, but their eyes showed confusion. They did not know whether to fear his courage or laugh at it. The queen rested her hands on the arms of her throne and looked directly at Aaron. Her voice was calm but powerful. "You say chains prove fear. You say standing proves strength. Very well, human. Then I wish to hear more of this strength. Speak." The nobles gasped. To give a human the right to speak in the royal hall was unheard of. They whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others leaning forward with interest. The queen ignored their noise and kept her eyes on Aaron. Aaron drew a slow breath. His throat was dry, but he would not show weakness. He lifted his chin and spoke so that all could hear. "You think my people are weak because we do not have claws or scales. You think we are fragile because we bleed easily. Yet you do not understand how many storms we have faced. We come from a world where fire, wind, and hunger try to break us every day. We rise again because we do not know how to give up." The words echoed through the chamber. Some nobles sneered, some frowned, but many remained silent. The guards beside Aaron tightened their grip, as though his voice carried more danger than his body. A noble with golden skin stepped forward. His robe glittered with jewels, and his voice was filled with mockery. "The human speaks of storms and hunger as if such things matter. What are storms compared to the power of an empire? What is hunger compared to the might of our armies?" His words are nothing but the cry of a small creature trying to sound large. Laughter spread through part of the hall. Yet Aaron did not break. His eyes remained steady. He answered with calm strength. "You laugh because you never faced hunger. You laugh because you never stood in the cold night with nothing but your own will to survive. You do not understand. True strength is not having power. True strength is standing when you have nothing." The laughter stopped. The golden-skinned noble scowled, but he had no quick reply. The silence that followed carried weight. Queen Zero leaned slightly forward, her eyes shining. You speak with certainty, human. Yet words can be empty. What proof do you bring? Aaron looked up at her throne. I am proof. I stand here when I should have fallen. Your soldiers tried to break me, but I am still standing. My body is chained, but my will is not. That is the proof of my kind. The queen's fingers tapped lightly against the arm of her throne. Her gaze did not soften, but her interest grew. She had seen countless prisoners before. Most begged, most cried, and many collapsed. This human did none of those things. One of the generals stepped forward again. He bowed low. My queen, I warn you. This human is dangerous, not because of his strength, but because of his defiance. If you allow him to speak more, he may stir unrest among your people. But Zira raised her hand. Do not tell me what I may allow in my hall, she said firmly. The general lowered his head in silence. She returned her gaze to Aaron. Human, your voice reaches my ears clearly. Yet you must understand where you stand. You are in the heart of my empire. You are bound by my guards. At a single command, your life would end. Knowing this, why do you still speak so boldly? Aaron answered without pause. Because fear changes nothing. If I am to fall, I will fall standing. That is the way of my people. That is the way of humans. The hall erupted once again with whispers. Nobles turned to each other, questioning what they had heard. Some shook their heads angrily, believing his words insulted their power. Others sat in thoughtful silence, unsettled by the human's courage. One young noble, smaller in stature than the rest, spoke up. His voice trembled but carried across the chamber. My queen, perhaps it is unwise to ignore this human. If one voice can command the attention of this hall, then perhaps his people are not as weak as we believed. The statement only deepened the divide. Some nobles shouted in anger, calling for silence, while others seemed unsure. The guards shifted nervously, watching the queen for direction. Queen Zira slowly rose from her throne. The hall went quiet at once. She descended 2 steps, her robe flowing like a river of red. Her tall figure cast a long shadow across the hall as she looked down at Aaron. Your voice has reached me, human, she said. Few have ever dared to speak so in my presence. Fewer still have done so without trembling. You may think yourself strong, but words alone are not enough. I wish to see if your strength is true or only wind. She lifted her hand, pointing toward the far side of the hall. The nobles turned their heads, and the heavy doors at the back opened. Beyond the doors, a glowing pit of shifting energy was revealed. Its light shimmered like water, yet its waves bent and twisted the air. It was a trial known only to the royal court. Those who entered often lost their minds before reaching the other side. Gasps filled the hall. Nobles whispered in shock. The pit of mind fire, one said. No one survives without scars, another whispered. The queen's voice rang out. If you are what you claim, human, then walk across the pit. If your will is unbroken, then let it carry you through. If you fall, you prove your weakness before all. If you succeed, then perhaps your words carry truth. The guards tugged Aaron's chains, ready to drag him toward the pit. But before they could move, Aaron spoke. His voice did not waver. I will walk. The guards froze. The queen's eyes narrowed in interest. You accept without hesitation, she said. Aaron's gaze stayed locked on her. Yes. Chains cannot test me. Only trials can. The hall filled with murmurs again. Nobles argued, some saying he would fall in seconds, others saying the queen wasted her time. But Queen Zira raised her hand, silencing them all. So be it, she declared. Let the trial begin. Let the human show us if his voice is truth or emptiness. The guards led Aaron toward the glowing pit. His chains rattled with every step, but his back remained straight. The light from the pit reflected in his eyes, twisting and shifting, yet his gaze stayed clear. The queen stood tall upon her throne steps, her sharp eyes following his every move. Her voice was low, almost to herself, yet the closest nobles heard. Let us see what this human truly is. The pit of mind fire glowed brighter as Aaron stepped closer. Its waves bent the air, twisting light into strange shapes. Some nobles turned their heads away, unable to look at the shifting colors without feeling dizzy. The guards unfastened part of his chains so he could move, leaving only the shackles around his wrists. They shoved him toward the edge, expecting him to stumble, but he kept his footing. The hall grew quiet. Every noble leaned forward, waiting for the moment he would fall. The queen stood tall on her throne steps, her eyes sharp and unblinking. Aaron looked down at the pit. The surface shimmered like liquid metal, yet when the waves rose, they made no sound. He could feel a pull in his head, as if the light itself was trying to drag his thoughts away. His heart pounded, but he remembered his words. Chains could not test him. Only trials could. He stepped forward. The moment his foot touched the glowing surface, a wave of heat surged through his body. It was not heat on his skin but heat in his mind. Memories rushed at him all at once. He saw his home, the fields where he once walked as a child, the faces of those he had lost, and the nights when hunger had kept him awake. The images came so fast that his head spun, yet he forced himself to take another step. The nobles whispered among themselves. He will fall soon, one said. No mind can carry that weight, another added. But Aaron kept moving. Each step was harder than the last. The pit pushed into his thoughts, trying to drown him in fear and doubt. He heard voices that were not his own. Some voices mocked him. Others told him to stop, to give up, to kneel. He clenched his fists, the chains rattling against his wrists, and pushed forward. His legs trembled. Sweat dripped from his brow. Yet he kept walking. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly. She had seen warriors of her empire fall within moments in that pit. Some cried. Some begged. Others lay broken on the glowing surface until they were dragged out. But this human kept standing, each step slow yet unbroken. Aaron's vision blurred. The light of the pit twisted into shapes of beasts with long fangs and burning eyes. They leapt at him, snarling, but when he reached out his hand, there was nothing there. He realized the pit was showing him fear. It was not real, but it wanted him to believe it was. He clenched his teeth and whispered to himself. Fear is not truth. Step by step, he moved forward. The court grew restless. Some nobles shouted for him to be pulled back, fearing that his survival would shame them. Others shouted for the trial to continue, eager to see whether he would truly last. Aaron's knees nearly buckled as he reached the middle of the pit. The pressure in his head felt like a storm. The voices grew louder, telling him he was alone, telling him no human could stand in this place. He thought of home again, of fire and rain, of the endless struggle for survival. He remembered the faces of his people. He remembered why he must not fall. He shouted aloud, his voice echoing across the hall. I walk for those who cannot. I stand because I must. The voices in his head trembled and began to fade. The shapes of beasts scattered like smoke. The light still burned, but he saw a path through it. With every step, he grew steadier. The queen leaned forward, her robe flowing like blood across the stone steps. Her eyes followed his every move. When Aaron lifted his head again, he met her gaze across the pit. For a moment, it felt as if the two of them were the only ones there. The last part of the path rose before him, brighter and harsher than before. The pit seemed to scream, filling his ears with 1,000 echoes. His legs shook, but he forced them to move. One step. Then another. The nobles rose to their feet, unable to stay seated. Some shouted for him to stop. Others shouted that he would fall at the last moment. The hall became a storm of voices, but Aaron heard none of it. He kept his eyes fixed forward. Finally, his foot touched solid stone again. He stumbled out of the pit, breathing hard, his body drenched in sweat. His chains clattered as he straightened his back and stood tall before the court. The hall fell silent. Not a single noble spoke. The queen slowly descended another step from her throne. Her eyes remained fixed on him. Her voice rang clear across the hall. He crossed. A wave of gasps swept through the chamber. Nobles exchanged stunned looks. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered in awe. The general who had warned her earlier stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "My queen, this means nothing. The pit is a test of will, but he may have stumbled through by chance. He is still a weak creature." But Queen Zira raised her hand, silencing him. She looked down at Aaron, who stood panting yet unbroken, his eyes still steady. "No," she said. "This was no chance. He walked when many of my own lords would have fallen." Her words cut deep into the pride of the nobles. Some lowered their eyes in shame. Others glared at Aaron with hatred. Aaron straightened his back fully, lifting his chin high. He spoke once more, his voice rough from the trial but clear. "Chains do not bind will. Trials only show truth. Now you see what a human is." The hall shook with murmurs again. The divide grew sharper. Some nobles demanded his end, saying his survival was an insult to the empire. Others remained quiet, unable to deny what they had witnessed. Queen Zira turned to her court, her voice rising above them. "The human has endured what many of you could not. Remember this before you call him weak." She looked back at Aaron. Her eyes were sharp, yet something new stirred within them. Respect. Curiosity. Perhaps even admiration. The trial was complete, but the true conflict had only begun. For Aaron had not only survived. He had changed the hall itself. The silence in the great hall stretched long after Aaron's final words. The nobles stood frozen, their proud faces shaken by the sight they had just witnessed. Never before had they seen a human, a creature they considered weak, cross the pit of mind fire without falling. The glowing pit behind him dimmed as though even it accepted defeat. Aaron's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but he did not bow his head. His chains rattled softly as he straightened his shoulders and lifted his gaze to meet the queen's. His body was tired, yet his spirit felt sharper than ever. Queen Zira stepped down from her throne, each movement measured and commanding. Her crimson robe flowed across the stone floor as she drew closer to the edge of the pit. Her eyes did not leave Aaron, and the hall seemed to shrink around them. She spoke, her voice steady and strong. "The human has crossed the pit. He has shown will where others would fall. This cannot be denied." Her words struck the nobles like a blow. Some hissed in anger, others lowered their eyes in silence, and a few looked at Aaron with grudging respect. One noble, tall with silver horns curling upward from his head, stepped forward. His robe glittered with jewels, and his voice thundered across the chamber. "My queen, forgive me, but this is dangerous. The human is a threat to the order of this court. If his defiance is praised, what will become of our authority? Will others begin to question their place beneath your throne? A wave of agreement spread among many nobles. Voices rose, filled with anger and fear. The human must be silenced, one shouted. "And him now before his voice spreads," cried another. Aaron listened, but his face showed no fear. He expected their hatred. He understood that his survival had shaken their pride. He stood taller, refusing to be broken by their calls for his death. Queen Zira raised her hand, and the hall fell quiet once more. Her gaze swept across her court, silencing every protest. "You speak of threats. You speak of danger. Yet none of you crossed the pit. None of you faced its trial today. Only the human stood against it and returned. Tell me, then, who among you has earned the right to speak of strength?" Her words cut deep. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, others clenched their jaws but remained silent. The queen's authority was absolute, and her words could not be challenged. But not all were silenced. A general in black armor stepped forward. His horned head cast a long shadow across the floor. He had been the one to warn her before, and his voice now carried heavy weight. "My queen," he said, bowing his head slightly, "I do not question your judgment. But I must remind you that strength is not only will. It is also loyalty. This human does not serve you. His courage may inspire rebellion, not unity. If you allow him to live, he may become a symbol of resistance against your throne." The hall stirred again, the nobles nodding at his words. Their fear found a voice in the general. Aaron lifted his head and spoke before the queen could answer. His voice was tired but still steady. "I did not come here to rebel. I was brought in chains. I do not ask for your throne. I do not ask for your empire. I only speak what is true. Chains cannot bind spirit. Trials cannot break will. If my words bring fear to those who hold power, then perhaps it is their weakness that is revealed, not mine." The hall shook with murmurs once more. Some nobles shouted angrily, others turned their eyes away, unwilling to admit the truth in his words. Queen Zira studied Aaron carefully. Her sharp gaze did not soften, but there was a new weight in her expression, as if she was measuring not just his strength but his worth. She turned back to her court. "You fear his words, yet you forget he is but one. If one human voice shakes you so deeply, then perhaps the fear does not lie in him, but in you." Her words struck like iron. The hall fell silent again. Even the general lowered his eyes, though his jaw tightened in anger. Still, the division was clear. Many nobles would not forget this day. Aaron had walked through fire and spoken without fear, and that was something they could not erase. Their pride had been wounded, and wounded pride often turned to hatred. Aaron stood in the center of it all, his chains heavy, his body tired, but his spirit burning. He knew he had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The queen had not decided his fate. The court was divided. And in their eyes, he was no longer just a prisoner. He was a symbol. The queen returned to her throne, her robe trailing behind her like a river of red. She sat tall, her hands resting on the arms of her seat. Her eyes locked on Aaron once more. "You have proven will," she said. "But will alone is not enough. My court is divided. Some call you a threat, others call you a fool, and a few see you as more. I will decide what you truly are." The general stepped forward again, his voice cautious. "My queen, allow me to test him further. Let him face a trial of strength, not only of mind. Let him stand before one of our warriors. If he falls, the matter ends. If he stands, then perhaps his words carry weight. The nobles cheered at this suggestion. Many wanted to see the human crushed in battle. It would heal their pride to watch him fail. Queen Zira tapped her finger lightly on the arm of her throne, deep in thought. She looked down at Aaron. What say you, human? Will you face a warrior of my court? Aaron lifted his chin. His body ached, his mind still throbbed from the pit, yet his voice carried no fear. If I must, then I will. Chains or no chains, I will not kneel. I will stand. The hall erupted in noise again. Some nobles laughed, others shouted in anger, but all were eager to see the coming trial. Queen Zira raised her hand, silencing them. She stood tall once more, her crown glowing with the light of the hall. Her voice rang with finality. So it shall be. Tomorrow, the human faces one of my champions. We will see if his courage holds against steel and strength. The guards pulled on Aaron's chains, dragging him back toward the prison chambers. Yet even as he was led away, he did not bow his head. His eyes stayed locked on the queen, and for a brief moment, her gaze met his again. She stood tall, her face unreadable, but her silence spoke louder than words. Something within her had changed, though no one in the court could name it. The night passed slowly in the dark chamber where Aaron was kept. The guards had chained him to the wall, leaving only a small torch burning in the corner. The stone floor was cold, and the weight of the chains pressed against his arms and legs, but Aaron did not allow despair to take root. His body was weak, yet his spirit was steady. He knew tomorrow would bring another trial, one that would decide whether he lived or died before the court. He closed his eyes and thought of his people, of the struggles they faced each day. Storms, hunger, fire, and war. He remembered the hands of his mother, calloused from labor, and the eyes of his father, filled with determination even in the darkest nights. He whispered to himself, I stand for them. I will not kneel outside the prison. The palace was alive with noise. Nobles filled the halls, arguing in every corner. Some believed the queen had been right to let the human face the pit. Others believed it was a mistake to let him live at all. The trial had shown too much. His defiance had pierced their pride, and now they debated whether crushing him in battle would heal the wound or deepen it. The general in black armor moved among them, his voice calm but filled with fire. The human must be destroyed, he said. He is dangerous not because of his body, but because of his voice. You saw how the queen looked at him. You saw how he stood even in chains. If such a creature lives, he will inspire others. Tomorrow, when he faces the champion, we must see to it that he falls quickly and without honor. Many nobles nodded. Yes, they said. The queen cannot protect him forever. If he is ended in the arena, his defiance will be forgotten, but not all agreed. In another corner of the palace, a smaller group of nobles spoke in hushed tones. A young noble with pale gray skin and bright eyes shook his head. The human stood against the pit. He faced what many of us would not dare. If such spirit exists in him, then perhaps it exists in others like him. Perhaps we have underestimated his kind. An older noble beside him frowned. Careful. To speak well of the human is dangerous. The court is divided, and the general watches every word. The younger noble answered, truth does not vanish because it is dangerous. You saw the queen's eyes. She sees something in him. If he survives tomorrow, then none can deny it. While the court whispered and plotted, the queen herself sat alone in her chamber. She removed her crown and placed it upon the table, her long silver hair falling across her shoulders. She stared into the quiet flames of a strange blue fire that burned without smoke. Her thoughts returned again and again to the human. She had ruled for many years, and she had seen countless prisoners brought before her throne. Most had begged for mercy or tried to deceive her with hollow words. Yet this one was different. His voice had carried no fear. His walk through the pit had been steady when even her strongest lords had failed. And when he spoke of chains and spirit, she had felt something stir within her, something she had not felt in a long time. Was it respect? Curiosity? Or perhaps the simple recognition of strength in a place she had not expected to find it? She did not know. She only knew that tomorrow's trial would decide more than the fate of one man. It would decide whether her judgment had been wise or foolish before the eyes of her people. Morning came, and the great hall was transformed into an arena. The pit of mind fire was sealed, and the floor was cleared for combat. The nobles filled the seats, their robes glittering with jewels and symbols of their houses. The air buzzed with tension, filled with shouts, laughter, and wagers. Some shouted for Aaron's defeat. Others waited in silence, curious to see what would happen. The guards dragged Aaron into the arena, his chains rattling as they pulled him forward. He looked worn from the night, but his eyes were bright. He lifted his head high, scanning the hall until his gaze found the queen upon her throne. She sat tall, her crown glowing in the morning light. Her face was calm, but her eyes watched him with sharp focus. The general in black armor stepped into the center of the hall. His voice boomed across the chamber. Today, the human faces one of our champions. If he survives, then perhaps his words carry weight. If he falls, then his defiance ends here. Let the trial begin, the crowd roared with approval. The gates on the far side of the arena opened, and a massive figure stepped out. The champion was taller than Aaron by 2 heads, his skin dark blue, his body covered in heavy plates of armor. He carried a long staff tipped with blades that glowed with energy. His eyes shone with cold determination as he struck the floor with his weapon, sending sparks across the stone. Aaron stood still, his chains heavy on his wrists. The guards removed the links between his feet, allowing him to move, but left his hands bound. He had no weapon, no armor, and no shield. Only his will. The champion sneered, his voice echoing. You are nothing but prey, human. I will end you swiftly, Aaron answered, his voice calm. You may end my body, but you cannot end my spirit. Strike if you must. I will stand until the last breath, the nobles shouted, some cheering, others mocking. The queen leaned forward on her throne, her eyes sharp as the two faced each other. The general raised his hand. Begin, the champion charged, his heavy steps shaking the floor. His weapon swung in a deadly arc, glowing with power. Aaron leapt aside, the chains clattering as he rolled across the stone. The blade struck the floor where he had stood, sending sparks into the air. The crowd gasped. Few expected the human to move so quickly. Aaron's body ached, but he forced himself to rise. He had no weapon, but he had his will. He would not fall without standing tall. The clash in the great hall began with a storm of sound. The champion's weapon cut through the air, its glowing blades flashing with sharp light. The crowd shouted in excitement, their voices shaking the high walls. Aaron stood with chains still on his wrists, his chest rising and falling as he faced the towering figure. The champion struck again, his staff slamming toward Aaron's head. Aaron ducked low and the blade missed him by an inch. Sparks flew as the weapon carved a line in the stone floor. Aaron stumbled but did not fall. He knew that one mistake would mean the end. The nobles shouted with laughter. The human dances like a mouse, one cried. Others cheered for the champion, calling for a quick finish. But the queen sat silent, her eyes fixed on every move. Aaron's mind raced. He had no weapon and no training in alien combat. Yet he remembered the struggles of Earth. He remembered running through forests, climbing rocks, carrying heavy loads, and fighting storms. His body was not weak. He had learned to survive with little. And now survival meant moving with speed and using his enemy's strength against him. The champion lunged again, his staff swinging with deadly force. Aaron leapt aside and grabbed the chain on his wrists, wrapping it around the weapon's shaft as it passed by. With a sudden pull, he jerked the weapon to the side. The champion growled and yanked it back, but the movement gave Aaron a moment to step close. He slammed his shoulder into the giant's chest, forcing him back a step. The crowd gasped. Few expected the human to strike. The champion roared in anger and shoved Aaron to the floor. Aaron rolled, the chains clattering, and barely avoided the blade that came down like a hammer. The stone cracked where he had been lying. Aaron's breath grew heavy, but his eyes burned with fire. He rose again, blood running from a cut on his arm, and faced the giant once more. "You will fall," the champion said. His voice was deep and full of certainty. "Perhaps," Aaron answered. "But I will stand until that moment." The queen's fingers tightened on her throne. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp and unblinking. Around her, nobles argued. Some shouted for the champion to finish it. Others murmured that the human had lasted too long already. The champion charged, faster this time, his weapon glowing brighter. Aaron ran to the side, forcing the giant to chase him in circles. Each time the blade swung, Aaron moved just far enough to survive. He knew his body could not keep this up forever. His only chance was to find one opening, one mistake, and strike with all he had. At last the champion grew impatient. He swung with both hands, putting all his strength into the attack. The staff slammed into the floor, stuck for a heartbeat in a crack of stone. Aaron saw his chance. He rushed forward, wrapping his chains around the champion's arm. He pulled with all his weight, twisting the arm to the side. The giant stumbled, surprised by the sudden move. Aaron leapt onto his back, wrapping the chain around the champion's neck. The crowd roared with shock, some rising to their feet. The champion struggled, thrashing and swinging his arms. Aaron held tight, his muscles burning, refusing to let go. The champion slammed his back against the wall, crushing Aaron. Pain filled his body, but still he clung to the chain. Again the champion slammed him against stone, and again Aaron held on. His vision blurred, but his spirit stayed firm. Finally the champion swung his staff back, striking Aaron in the ribs. The blow knocked him to the ground, his breath gone. The giant tore the chain from his neck and raised his weapon high. The crowd cried out, expecting the end. Aaron struggled to rise. His arms shook, his legs weak, but his eyes lifted to the queen. He saw her standing now, tall and silent, watching every breath. He thought of his people, of every storm they had endured, of every hardship faced with unbroken will. He forced himself to stand straight, even as the champion loomed over him. The champion swung down. Aaron stepped forward at the last moment, letting the blade strike the chain on his wrists. Sparks exploded as metal struck metal. The chain broke, falling in pieces to the floor. Aaron's hands were free. The hall went silent. Aaron seized the broken chain, now sharp at one end, and struck with all his strength. The jagged metal slashed across the champion's arm. The giant roared in pain, dropping his weapon. Aaron kicked it away, sending it skidding across the floor. The champion swung a fist at him, but Aaron ducked and wrapped the chain around his legs. With a hard pull, he brought the giant crashing to the ground. The hall shook with the impact. The crowd cried out in disbelief. Aaron climbed onto the fallen champion and pressed the chain against his throat. He could have ended it then, but instead he looked up at the queen. His voice rang across the hall. "I will not kill him. I am not here to be a beast for your games. I stand because I must. Not because I desire to destroy." The queen's eyes widened. For the first time, her lips curved into the smallest sign of respect. The general rose from his seat, furious. "End him, queen. He is dangerous. If you spare him, he will spread his defiance to all." But the hall was divided. Some nobles shouted for Aaron's death. Others shouted for his victory. The sound grew louder and louder until it shook the pillars of the hall. Aaron released the champion and stood tall, the broken chain in his hand. He faced the court without fear. His chest rose and fell, his body wounded, yet his spirit unbroken. The queen raised her hand, and the hall fell silent. She stepped down from her throne, her tall figure glowing in the light. She walked across the floor until she stood before Aaron. The crowd held its breath. She looked into his eyes and said, "You stand free, human. No chain binds you now." The great hall was quiet. Every noble had stopped speaking, every guard was still, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. Aaron stood in the center, his body bruised, sweat dripping from his brow, and his chest heaving from the effort of survival. He looked around at the court, seeing faces filled with shock, awe, and fear. The champion lay on the floor, defeated but alive, groaning as he struggled to rise. Queen Zira descended from her throne, moving forward with calm authority. Her crimson robe flowed behind her like a river of light, and her crown glimmered with power. She stopped before Aaron, her eyes sharp, yet now softened with a hint of admiration. "You have endured the pit, you have faced my champion, and you have not fallen," she said, her voice strong and steady. "No human has ever shown such will and courage in my court," the nobles whispered among themselves. Some were furious, others were speechless. The queen raised her hand again, and all voices stilled. "Some of you may wish to see this human destroyed. Some may still doubt his strength. Yet I see truth where others see only fear. This human has proven that chains and trials cannot break spirit. I acknowledge that strength comes in many forms." The hall fell completely silent. Even the general in black armor, who had shouted for Aaron's death, bowed his head, unwilling to challenge the queen's judgment openly. Aaron straightened his back, his body aching, but his eyes held fire. He bowed his head slightly to the queen. "I did not fight for praise or recognition. I fought because I must. Chains cannot bind wool. Trials only show what is already within." Queen Zira studied him for a long moment. Her eyes narrowed slightly, then softened. She lifted her hand and pointed to the broken chains on the floor. Guards stepped forward and removed the remaining shackles from Aaron. The weight of metal fell away, yet Aaron did not move from his place. He waited, standing tall, breathing heavily but unbroken. "You are free," the queen declared. "Not because I am merciful, but because your courage demands it. You have shown the court the truth of your kind. Humans are not weak. Humans endure. Humans rise," the nobles murmured in disbelief. Many looked at each other in shock, realizing that their own assumptions had been proven wrong. Others looked at Aaron with new respect, understanding for the first time that strength was not always measured by size, armor, or weaponry. Aaron looked at the queen and asked quietly, "What now, my queen? Will your court accept the truth of my people?" The queen's lips curved slightly in the smallest sign of a smile. "They will learn, slowly. Many will resist at first. Some will doubt. But in time, courage speaks louder than words. You have given them a lesson they will not forget." A young noble in the front rows rose. His gray skin glimmered under the hall lights. "Your Majesty, perhaps we have been wrong to judge this human so quickly. His courage is clear. His will is unbroken. We may yet learn from him." Others nodded. The murmurs changed from anger to reflection. Even the general in black armor lowered his gaze. He had been certain that Aaron would fall, yet now he understood that strength was not always as he had imagined. Aaron felt a strange calm wash over him. He had entered the hall in chains, a prisoner, with no power and no allies. Now he stood free, having faced impossible trials and survived. His body ached, yet his spirit was stronger than ever. Queen Zira turned to her court once more. "Let this day be remembered. Let the courage of one human remind you that strength is not only in armor, not only in armies, but also in the heart. From this day forward, humans may stand among us, not as slaves, not as weaklings, but as equals in spirit." The hall erupted in whispers. Some nobles clapped softly, some bowed their heads in respect, and some continued to glare in silent anger. But no one could deny the power of what they had witnessed. Aaron had changed the court with his courage. The queen stepped closer to Aaron. Her eyes held a new respect, her voice calm but filled with command. "You may walk freely, human. I would trust you in my court, though many may not yet understand why. You have earned your place not by title, not by wealth, but by the strength of your will." Aaron bowed slightly in respect. "I will not betray that trust, my queen. I have come to show what humans can endure, and I will honor your judgment with my actions." Queen Zira studied him for a long moment. She nodded, slowly, then turned to her throne. "Let all remember this day. Let no one forget that courage cannot be chained, and that truth may come from the most unlikely place." The nobles began to rise, some slowly, some with hesitation, acknowledging the queen's decision. Even the champion rose from the floor, dusting himself off. He approached Aaron, his eyes no longer filled with anger but with respect. "You fought well, human," the champion said, his voice deep and steady. "I underestimated you. Your courage is greater than many I have seen in this hall. Today, you have earned my respect." Aaron nodded. "I did not fight to earn respect. I fought to survive and to show that courage matters." The queen's gaze swept across the hall, and she spoke once more. "Let the court learn from this day. Let courage be valued above fear. Let strength be measured not only by body, but by spirit. Today, a human has reminded us all of this truth." The crowd fell silent, absorbing the weight of her words. Aaron stood tall, his eyes scanning the hall one final time. He had entered in chains, he had faced impossible trials, and he had survived. His courage had changed the court, and even the queen herself had recognized it. Queen Zira turned and ascended her throne once more. Her posture was taller, her presence stronger. For the first time in her rule, she had acknowledged that strength could come from the most unexpected places. And in that moment, both she and Aaron understood that the world had changed, even within the walls of the great hall. Aaron looked at the glowing light above, took a deep breath, and felt the freedom he had earned. The hall was no longer only a place of judgment, it was a place of understanding. And the queen, who had once seemed untouchable, now stood tall in respect for the human who had faced impossible trials and survived. The court slowly dispersed, nobles whispering in awe and reflection. Aaron remained standing, no longer a prisoner, his chains gone, and his spirit unbroken. The queen watched him for a moment longer before turning her attention to the hall, commanding her empire with new understanding. And in the quiet that followed, one truth echoed through the walls of the hall: courage cannot be bound, and strength comes not from chains or weapons, but from the heart. Aaron had proven the truth, and the queen had seen it. The great hall would never forget the day a human stood unbroken before an empire.